effort that we're working on at the moment. There's a project background on this and a bunch of other good things that we're working on. I'll also talk about the Fort Worth to Laredo high-speed transportation study that we completed back about 9 or 10 months ago. And then if there's anything you guys would like to talk about or ask or anything, we'll have a little general discussion toward the end. Basically, the study objective for our Dallas to Fort Worth high-speed transportation connection study is to connect Dallas and Fort Worth to other high-performance passenger systems in the state. In other words, the proposed system that goes from Dallas to Houston, and then the Fort Worth to Laredo one that I'll talk about later. The other part, and the reason the word connections is not just because of those connections in the study name, but also because we want to connect within the region. We want to connect what's already our last mile connections, such as the light rail, buses, transportation network companies, and those kind of things. And then the other thing is we want to obtain federal environmental approval. So this is a NEPA process that we'll be going through in the end. This is our study area. It goes from downtown Fort Worth to downtown Dallas, and approximately from State Highway 183 down to State Highway 303. We're doing a phased approach. We're currently in the first phase. Here's where we're going to do a lot of public and agency engagement. It's really an alternatives analysis phase is what it really is, and doing a lot of screening, because the idea is that we want to identify as few alignments and technologies as possible as we move into the NEPA phase, which will be our second phase. As many of you know, you only have 24 months to complete that process. So we want to make sure we get as much done in the alternatives analysis phase as we possibly can. So during this first phase, we've come up with a draft preliminary project purpose. And as I mentioned, is connect downtown Dallas and downtown Fort Worth. I think the key here is that it's a high-speed intercity passenger rail service or an advanced high-speed ground transportation technology. And a lot of this is typical to the project purpose statement, providing safe, convenient, efficient travel options, advancing the state, enhancing connectivity, supporting economic development opportunities. So a lot of that's pretty typical, but I think the key here is that it's a ground transportation travel options that are setting this apart from what some others might think would say the elevated transportation systems. As we know, we're all growing very fast. We're going to end up with about 11.5 million people in 2045. And that's going to result in about 7 million jobs, nearly 50% increase, or a little more than 50% increase in population, but almost 50% in employment between 2018 and 2045. The other part is the increasing congestion and travel times. What we found is that within the region, in 2018, there was a congestion about 40% of the time in Tarrant County and about 50% of the time in Dallas County in 2018. And then in 2045, we expect that to be 60% in Tarrant County and over 70% in Dallas County. Focused on those two counties, that's where the study area for this particular project is. So we looked at an awful lot of different things. We developed our initial alignments based on a lot of other previous studies. TxDOT had done some work on what we called the Dallas to Fort Worth Core Express service, and that basically ended as an alternatives analysis. So we took those alignments. We also looked at, when we did some station area studies a few years later, we also did some alignment analysis, and we took some of those. We're trying to stay in the right of way, in the public right of way, as much as possible, because we feel like that's already been disturbed, and hopefully that will have a less impact. And all alignments are going to connect to the Texas Central Railway proposed high-speed rail station in Dallas, as well as the Fort Worth Central Station in Fort Worth. And that particular area in Fort Worth is where we identified through our station location analysis that would be the most appropriate station area, along with the city of Fort Worth, who provided significant input into that. So all this said, we came up with 43 total end-to-end alignment options and corridors throughout the study area. And this is a general map of them. We've divided them into 5 families. The first is sort of all those alignments and corridors that focus on the Trinity Railway Express in some way or another. The next options, excuse me, focused on the Trinity River. Actually, kind of use the floodplain, if you will, through much through the rivers we could to stay out of the way of other development. We have our I-30 set of projects or set of alignments. We have State Highway 180. We have a series of alignments that focus on that particular area, and then State Highway 303 to the south. And mixing and matching a lot of those is where we got to the 43. We also have looked at over 5 particular transportation modes, all the way from conventional rail, including higher speed, high speed, maglev, and Hyperloop. We've also been working with some companies to talk about more suspended high speed type of transportation. There's a lot of options out there. So the types of passenger rail, again, conventional, we all know what that kind of looks like and how that operates, fixed schedules and things. Higher speed rail goes up to about 125 miles an hour. Does not have an exclusive guideway or right-of-way. Pretty much the same as conventional rail, only a little faster. High speed goes up to 250 miles per hour. It is an exclusive guideway, much like what the Texas Central project will be. Headways can be as little as 3 minutes and usually around 30 minutes. It's on a fixed schedule. And as far as what the last column here, the technology readiness, that's an important factor for us because we want to make sure the technology that we recommend in this alternatives analysis is indeed going to be available at the time that we want to implement the project. So the other 2 that we really focused on were maglev, over 300 miles an hour. Possibility is currently operating in China. And then Hyperloop, which can go much more than 600 miles an hour, has its exclusive guideway. It's more of an on-demand service, sort of a smart elevator, if you will. We're kind of thinking of it in that regard, where you could get into an elevator and skip 12 floors and get to the 13th or 14th floor without stopping, kind of an idea. And prototypes are undergoing testing. I don't know if many of you know, but the Virgin Hyperloop group has tested their system in Nevada at their test facility and actually had 2 people ride in it at one time. So it's been tested with humans. So we're kind of thinking this might be a technology that might be viable or at least operational for us by the time the study's over. Many of these different technologies are similar because they operate on fixed guideways and rails of some kind. They have great speeds. The amount of right-of-way needed for them is about the same. Stations and maintenance facilities, can be driverless. But the differences really come down to propulsion. How do they get their energy and move? The distance between stations, their operating schedule, fixed versus demand. Most of them are on fixed schedules. Hyperloop, as we mentioned, was on a on-demand type schedule. As we're finding out, it's interesting. We didn't expect this, but we're finding that the high speed and higher speed and maglev technologies are all contemplating incorporating freight into their arsenal of rolling stock and those kind of things. So it's a little bit more interesting than we anticipated originally. We didn't know that there'd be much cargo. We wanted to also kind of look into that aspect of transportation. And the interoperability. I mentioned interoperability because it could go a couple of ways. One is the Dallas to Houston high-speed train could continue on to Fort Worth as an interoperable system. Or we could pick a system to go from Dallas to Fort Worth and then eventually, as I'll mention in a little bit, continue that system on down southward. So there's an interoperability component to all of the possible modes and alignments that we have. Project screening process was really fairly detailed. The first level, we kind of looked at everything and said, does it meet our purpose and need? Our second level was more of a fatal flaw kind of an analysis, evaluating the alternatives and ranking them basically on scales, if you will. We're just now beginning our level 3 detailed evaluation, which will include 5% design. So in that first level, does it serve downtown Dallas and Fort Worth? Does it have the correct travel time? In other words, is it faster than what we currently have? And some secondary criteria are listed here. The more detailed fatal flaw analysis in level 2 really looked at the proximity to sensitive social, biological, and cultural areas, much like you will in the NEPA process. How much impact would there be to the various communities along the corridor? And again, this technology maturity concept, we used the NASA technology readiness scale and system to identify those technologies that were ready for use, or those that have been tested enough to be ready for use when we get ready for this. What's the capacity, compatibility with existing infrastructure, and operational considerations? You know, how often does the system operate? One of the things we're trying to incorporate here is a concept that I think is kind of interesting, in that it's engaged travel time. One of the things that often get, I think, overlooked when it comes to public transportation is the fact that there is a total travel time, and then there's a travel time involved with when you are actually engaged in the traveling. For instance, when you drive your automobile, you're engaged 100% of the time. When you take public transportation, you don't have to be engaged for quite a large part of that, because you're riding on a train or on a bus or something like that. So my point is that this criteria that we're thinking of here is more about total travel time minus in-vehicle travel time. So the only part of the engaged travel time is your out-of-vehicle travel time, or your wait time at a station kind of thing. So it kind of makes it more of a level playing field when, for instance, public transportation might take a little longer to get from point A to point B than an automobile. But at the same time, your engaged travel time might be less. Then when we get into level 3, we're going to get more NEPA-like in doing some cost, those potential impacts to sensitive areas. Again, we did the proximity first, but now we're going to look at more potential impacts, and then the community impacts, and then the constructability and operability. How is this going to work? And actually, we're going to come up with a service plan that we'll have to work on that. So this is sort of maybe I'll send this over to Jeff and Bob so you can have this again, but this is our results from our level 1 screening. Level 2 screening kind of pared things down. We ended up with about 8 alignments that carried out of level 2. We're still actually in level 2 because we have our public meetings coming up soon. We want to make sure that the public understands where we are with all of this and has a chance to weigh in on it. The modes that we believe will be eliminated in the second phase are higher speed and conventional rail, which was actually eliminated in the first level of screening, which would leave us with about 8 alignments and 3 modes that we would be carrying forward into the third level of screening. And those 8 alignments look like this, basically on I-30, and a little bit of use of the State Highway 180 corridor along, and then along the UP Railroad on the eastern side of the study area. Now, when I say along the UP Railroad corridor, I don't mean in the UP Rail corridor. I mean sort of following along and separate from that particular right of As I mentioned, conventional rail and higher speed rail have been eliminated from further discussion, or will be if we continue with the phase 2, and that's what we end up. So we've had a lot of public and agency engagement up to this point. We've had public meetings back in September. We had our resource agency meeting in late December, mid-December, I guess. We've also been meeting with the FRA and the FTA continually every month throughout this process to keep them informed and keep them up to date on what's going on. But one thing to keep in mind is we do have an upcoming public meeting series Wednesday and Thursday, January 27th and 28th. On the 27th, it'll be at noon. And on the 28th, it will be at 6 p.m. And that information can be found as far as how to hook up to that. Can be found at our website at nctcog.org/DFW-HSTCS. So I also would like to ask if there's any other groups that anyone is involved with that would like to have this information discussed at your group. We'd be more than happy to do that. We're able to speak anytime, anywhere, basically. Contact us. Rebecca Hernandez is our communication supervisor overseeing this particular project. So if you could contact her, that would be the right way to go. Our schedule, as I mentioned, it's a two-phase schedule. The first phase is this alternative analysis that we're doing in about 12 months. We should be completed with this toward the end of April, first part of May. And that'll fall into the phase 2 schedule, which is the NEPA documentation part of this. And we will begin going through the scoping process in August and really kicking off late summer with our notice of intent. So I guess I mentioned those next steps. Is there any general discussion on this particular project? Anyone have any questions on the Dallas to Fort Worth project we're working on?
Kevin, I do have a question, and this is a good opportunity. If anybody does have questions for Kevin about these projects, please post them in the chat and we'll call on you. But one question to kick us off is, can you walk through a little bit of the difference between the Hyperloop and the high-speed rail and the maglev and the various technologies that y'all are looking at for these projects?
Sure. I'll kind of go back to the so with the high speed, first of all, the thing to keep in mind is even though these systems can go greater than 250 miles an hour, we do not anticipate them to reach those speeds between Dallas and Fort Worth. There's just not enough length to the corridor, especially if there's a station in Arlington. We would not anticipate any of these technologies getting greater than maybe 125 to 150 miles an hour. High-speed rail is typically your typical passenger rail type trains, more aerodynamic, a few more features on them maybe, and they go very, very fast. They generally have an overhead catenary that provides the electric propulsion, although we have found through some investigation with some of the technology firms, first of all, we had a technology forum back in early December where we invited all the worldwide potential technologies to join us and provide us with some information. Then after that meeting, we've done some one-on-one meetings, and one of the companies we've spoken with already is Alstom and Talgo. Both of them are high-speed vehicle manufacturers, basically. And each have told us that they're interested in a hydrogen propulsion system rather than electric. So that's kind of an interesting twist we didn't realize going into all this. So where high speed generally has the overhead catenary like you would see on the Dart light rail system, they're actually now starting to move toward a more hydrogen fuel cell propulsion technology. Maglev is very similar. The guideway there, though, is the vehicle is actually magnetically levitated above the rails so that there would be virtually no vibration, virtually no noise except for the wind kind of a noise. Very similar to high-speed trains, goes a little faster because it has less friction and things. But other than that, it's pretty similar to high-speed rail, just a little different propulsion. Hyperloops are a whole different game, actually. It's a tube that is a near vacuum, and the pods, they're not long trains like you would have with maglev or high speed, but they're more pod oriented. And you might have anywhere from 15 to 30 or so people in a pod, which gives it the flexibility to have sharper curve radii, different vertical curvature as well, which allows the magnetically levitated system plus the near vacuum allows it to go much faster because you're basically in outer space. When you take away the vacuum and take away the friction, you're basically in an outer space type atmosphere. The concerns that we hear a lot about the Hyperloop system are its safety regarding the what happens if the vacuum breaches, what happens if people have to escape. So there's a lot of stuff still to be worked out. At one point, we were one of the finalists for a high-speed or Hyperloop certification center, where they'll be certifying with federal standards that particular technology. It unfortunately went to West Virginia, but we continue to maintain a relationship with the Virgin Hyperloop and several other Hyperloop companies, in fact, about the possibility of this being the first project. They may be certifying it somewhere else or developing its standards somewhere else, but maybe they could actually implement it initially here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So it's a little different in that with the train sets, maglev and high speed, it's a typical pull into a station, wait for passengers to get on and off and to continue on. So it's on a fixed schedule. Whereas with Hyperloop, you could have an awful lot of extra stations. Again, like an elevator in a tall building, you could get on and go to whatever floor you want to without having to stop. And it's on demand. You get to the elevator, you push the button, the elevator door opens, you get on and you go. It's similar with Hyperloop is what they're telling us is their operational model. Does that help answer your question, Jeff?
It does. Thank you very much. Very helpful. We've got, looks like a couple questions from Bob with WSP. Bob, do you want to unmute and ask your questions?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks again, Kevin. Just wanted to find out reason for elimination of conventional and higher speed rail. And then also wanted to find out where you're thinking about stations in mid-cities.
I'm sorry, the second question was station in the mid-cities?
Yeah.
I'll answer that one first. At this point, Bob, with a lot of help from WSP, we actually looked at where we would put a station in the city of Arlington. As you know, our Regional Transportation Council has a three-station concept policy, whereby we would have a station in downtown Fort Worth, downtown Dallas, and another one in Arlington. And through the work we did with WSP, we identified, and the city of Arlington actually was very instrumental in this, we identified a location in the entertainment district near the stadiums, if you will. That would be the station location. Now, the fly in the ointment in that is the city of Dallas and somewhat the city of Fort Worth have indicated a strong desire for the city of Arlington to be a voting member in a public transportation agency before they have this station located there. Now, obviously, the station location is years in the future, but as we go through this process, this alternatives analysis and into the NEPA process, the question right now is, will we include an Arlington station in the NEPA process? I get the sense we probably will, just in case it's easier to do a supplemental with taking it out, I think, than it is with having to add one back in. Anyway, that's the idea right now, is that we're looking, and we have some meetings set up with the city of Arlington to discuss this and how we're going to proceed. But the interim station would be in the city of Arlington in the entertainment district area. And the reason that conventional rail and higher speed rail have fallen by the wayside is primarily because of the travel speeds. Conventional rail, because it stops so frequently and doesn't reach the desired speeds, we limited that fairly quickly. And then higher speed, again, I think it's probably a misconception that we've actually eliminated it, because like I mentioned, even though these technologies go much faster, they're not going to go quite that fast in this corridor, which are going to act more like higher speed rail anyway in this corridor. For instance, again, talking with Talgo, the whole concept is you drive your car and you can go 70 miles an hour on the highway, but your car also goes 20 miles an hour in the school zone. And the same concept with these high-speed trains, in that they can go 250 miles an hour in the long open stretches between here and Houston, but they can also go 100, 125, 150 miles an hour between Dallas and Fort Worth. So I think it's really a misconception that we're eliminating higher speed rail, but at the same time, we're not going to consider that one of the technologies. We're going to consider just the high speed as the technology. Any other questions?
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Kevin. We've got a question from Phil with LAN. Phil, you're up.
Hey, Kevin, thanks for your presentation. Lots of good information about the various technologies and things like that. A question I had is just, could you comment on the impact of, I guess, getting to some sort of revenue service based on, what type of vehicle technology would be selected, if, Hyperloop versus using some sort of conventional type technology.
I'm sorry, I feel I'm not, you wanted to know how long it might take to get to the revenue service?
Yeah, I mean, but as far, if say someone said, yeah, let's do the project. And, if you're looking at a, more of an emerging technology like Hyperloop versus some conventional technology like, some of the more traditional rail, higher speed rail systems, what's the impact of the, delivery schedule?
I don't know that there is an impact, quite honestly. And the reason I mention that is we're trying to use this NASA technology readiness process to make sure that these emerging technologies, such as Hyperloop and the overheaded guideway, air track is what it's called, that they actually are ready to go when we're ready to go. Now, the real question becomes, when will we be ready to go? We anticipate the second phase of the NEPA process to conclude with a record of decision in approximately late summer of 2023. Well, we still don't have a governance agency. We don't have a governance option identified. We don't have the funding identified. We'll have to come up with some of that in the NEPA process, but at the same time, that is really what's going to depend upon things. And I think the real impact would be if we get to, let's say we do recommend Hyperloop, and all of a sudden they run into trouble with their certification, and the federal government isn't going to give them the certification and approvals that they need. And that becomes a big problem. Then we'd have to go back and analyze this again from a different technology. But I think at this point, we're pretty confident that any technology we would recommend would be available in the 2025 to 2026 timeframe if all things go according to plan. So I don't expect there to be any impacts no matter what technology we select, but I do expect to have some robust discussions regarding implementing entities and funding options.
Thanks.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Phil, do you have a follow-up question?
No, I don't.
Okay, great. Real quick related question for you on that, Kevin. Is the timing dependent on the technology that's ultimately selected? Or are we looking at 2025, 2026 regardless? And then follow up. Yeah.
I'm
Oh, go
sorry.
ahead.
Yeah, we are looking at 25, 26 as a irregardless of what, that's why we want to make sure the technology can be ready by then as we move forward. If it can't be ready by then, we're not going to include it in our any further analysis.
Great. And then a follow up to that is, talk about what are y'all coordinating with Texas Central on their project? And
Yes.
yeah. Okay. Great. Great. All right. Looks like we have, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, Kevin.
Saying, yeah, in fact, they are very interested in what we are doing because they've always indicated to us, or at least they did many years ago, that they had high interest in this corridor. It's just it doesn't fit their business model from having to construct the infrastructure. And the ridership is, while it might be high, it might not be high enough to offset those additional costs. So their business model is not conducive if they have to construct the infrastructure in the corridor.
Great. Thank you very much. We've got a question from Mofid. Mofid, you're up.
Hello. I typed my question here. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Do you want me to read your question for you?
Would you? Yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
that's
sure
fine.
thing. Okay. So the question is, the new work from home culture that has been proven effective during the pandemic will to some extent affect the transportation demand pattern in our area like everywhere else. Has this phenomenon been incorporated into the studies?
Well, it has in the sense of we're not sure exactly how long that phenomenon will last. So at this point, we're still anticipating a return to normalcy by 2045 in some fashion. That being said, this particular system is more akin to how an airline might operate from at least the Dallas to Houston piece, and the Fort Worth to Dallas piece is an extension of that particular service. It's not as much commuter oriented as it is long distance travel, just a last mile connection piece, if you will, of a longer system, sort of like the puddle jumper to a 747. Maybe you would take a large plane to New York, and then you would take a smaller plane to Albany or something of that nature. So we haven't exactly incorporated a particular factor, if you will, regarding how the travel behavior might be different in 2045. At this point, we're assuming that between now and then, in roughly 25 years, that some normalcy will have been identified, and travel behavior will be somewhat consistent with what it has been in the past. Now, we agree that there's going to be a lot more telecommuting and a lot more of these Zoom calls for business meetings that might be taking place outside of your region, for instance. But at the same time, we feel that with the increases in population, there would still be a high need for this particular type service.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, I think we've got time for one more question because I want to reserve a little bit of time to talk about our Transportation Crossroads Committee and some other upcoming programs. Does anybody have a final question for Kevin? If not, I can ask some more.
Well, I've got a little bit more I wanted to.
Yeah,
Bob
please
had asked
do.
me to talk about.
Please do.
Get down to there's my contact information. But before we're to Laredo, TxDOT previously did the Texas-Oklahoma passenger rail study, and what we're trying to do here, that was a tier 1 environmental study. We're trying to bridge to the tier 2 with what we did. We were trying to make sure we could come up with 1 alignment instead of 3 in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. It's pretty much the same technologies, except for we added regional rail and guaranteed transit in the Fort Worth to Laredo corridor. And as it turned out, this was the particular alignment. The Fort Worth to Waco was in a utility corridor. Waco to San Antonio along I-35, and San Antonio to Laredo is in a greenfield. And really the reason to go from San Antonio to Laredo isn't just to get to Laredo or all the great features along the Rio Grande River, but the real reason to get there is so you can cross the river and get into Mexico, because there's a very large ridership increase once you get across into Mexico. And so what we found is this particular alignment with a Hyperloop technology with all the stops, as you see here, would be something that warrants further analysis in a tier 2 project level environmental study. And I'll take any questions you might have. I went through that very quickly, but I know there's no short time left, so I wanted to make sure I got that.
That's great. Thank you, Kevin. I think we have a question from Deb Rastogi. Deb, do you want to unmute?
Yeah, thanks, thanks, Jeff, and thanks, Kevin. Terrific program as usual. And so, you know, both of these projects, I think the question that we have is about funding. You know, we're thinking about potentially stimulus money coming, you know, through the new administration. And so, you know, what can we do with these projects, either the Dallas to Fort Worth, or perhaps even progressing this Fort Worth to Laredo? Could you talk a little bit about kind of the challenge for the Fort Worth to Laredo in terms of, you know, how you can get, you know, I think there's a lot of entities that have to be brought along that corridor.
Yeah. The interesting point about Fort Worth to Laredo is the Texas Department of Transportation's position, based on direction from the legislature, that they are not to be in the high-speed business, basically. That's the way we've interpreted it anyway. And it was interesting, right around the time that the pandemic began in March, we were in conversations with TxDOT about going to the commission with the results of this particular effort to find out what level of interest TxDOT did have. We did this particular study as a group of metropolitan planning organizations. Each of the ones you see here listed were part of the project for us. The next step is to get concurrence from TxDOT whether or not they want to go to the tier 2 analysis, tier 2 NEPA documentation, or if we as the MPO coalition are going to have to go and do it on our own. And if we do that, then I think it's really going to be interesting to identify what funding sources are available, because I'm not sure Killeen and Temple and Waco in particular have a lot of additional funding that they want to spend on this particular type of project. They'd be more than happy to have this project in their region, but I think they have enough need in other areas to spend their available funds on. So I think the real question is, what is the next step on this? And we don't know, because we don't know if it's going to be a TxDOT-led project or if it's going to be a coalition of MPOs leading the project to the next phase as well. Regarding the funding overall, as far as, well, let's think about this Fort Worth to Laredo being 450 miles. And if a project level NEPA document costs, I don't know, what is it? Probably $500,000 a mile to do. You know, that's $225 million you're going to need just to do the environmental document all the way to Laredo. So there's a lot of funding needed just to get that part done. But on the Fort Worth to Dallas piece, I think this is where we're anticipating there to be a public-private partnership of some kind involved. Because once we get through the NEPA part, then it becomes a much more viable project and becomes much more attractive to the private sector. And I think that's where a lot of our thoughts are at this point, at least, in that there might be some group out there that wants to implement a new technology that whether it's a maglev project or whether it's a Hyperloop or even another high-speed company from another another country that wants to have entry into the US market, that they would be willing to go the extra mile in this particular corridor with an opportunity to go south of Fort Worth as a much longer corridor. So we're hoping that the Dallas to Fort Worth piece actually attracts a significant private investment to continue the process as well. Does that answer your question, Dev?
Yeah, I was just curious what you were thinking about the funding, so appreciate that that response.
Yeah, any green dollar out there we can find, we would be happy to accept car washes, bake sales, anything like that.
Hey, Kevin,
Thanks.
real quick, speaking of funding, I think as many of you all know, today is the opening day of the 87th legislative session. What are y'all tracking as it relates to these high-speed rail projects in the session, which starts today?
I wish Rebecca were on the call with me. She's our legislative liaison person, but my recollection from what I've seen from her presentations is we're just really tracking what's going on with the Texas Central project, making sure that there isn't some legislative initiative that would harm that particular project. Our goal is to get that project implemented just as much as Texas Central wants to get it implemented. So I'm thinking that's the general sort of oversight right now, as opposed to we're not proposing any legislation, or we're not trying to champion anyone else's legislation. We're just trying to make sure that nothing harmful comes from the session.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. And we are certainly aligned there. Texas Central is one of our chamber priorities, making sure that that stays on track during the session. So we'll be monitoring that as well, in addition to many other issues.
Kevin, if Rebecca has anything else that she wants to send to us at the North Dallas Chamber,
Okay.
we'd love to see it, just so we're aware of what your legislative priorities are.
Yeah, I'll have her send our legislative platform that the RTC is adopted.
Great. Well, any other final comments from you, Kevin, or any other real brief questions from the group?
I do not. I just want to thank everyone for getting up so early and listening to me this morning. I appreciate it, and I'm glad that I could hopefully provide some helpful information to your daily work.
Well, thanks, Kevin. And if it's okay with you, can you email me and Bob the PDFs and we can distribute them to the full committee?
Definitely.
Great. Thank you very much. And we did record this, so we will be posting it on our North Dallas Chamber YouTube channel as well, if anybody wants to watch it again or send it to folks who weren't able to participate today.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, we've got about 5 minutes left, so I briefly wanted to touch on our Transportation Crossroads Conference from last month. Seems like a long time ago, but it was just about a month ago. Does anybody here have any comments or suggestions on the conference? I know it was the first time that we did it virtual, and we're planning to go back to in-person for next year's conference, but would love to get the group's feedbacks and thoughts on the conference, both substantively and relative to the virtual platform for it.
Jeff, one thing on the conference, and I don't know how we can encourage more participation with our agency partners other than just the senior level staff. I think, it's important for us to, it's an opportunity for folks to network with those agency professionals outside of different things, and they're so locked down nowadays with restrictions due to different things, and it'd be a good opportunity to, just encouraging those agencies to have more of their staff attend.
Yeah, Phil, which agencies are you thinking need to be better represented? We had about 100 TxDOT people there. Yeah.
I think TxDOT had a very limited presence. We had, DART, we had a single representative there, as I recall, maybe two. I think for NTTA, we had, you know, Elizabeth and no one else. So, you know, just in general, our transportation partners, I mean, it's, you know, it's a transportation industry. It's just not, you know, it's for them to get to know us, and I just see it as, you know, just a one-way voice. They're gone, especially if we're still in kind of a virtual meeting.
Yeah, that is one of the challenges with the virtual setting is, you know, we had about 100 TxDOT registrants, and I'm not sure how many of them actually logged in, but we did have about 100 that signed up, and a few both from NTTA as well as from DART that participated. And so, you know, the challenge with the virtual setting is, you know, everybody's on different floors, and you know, there were plenty of people who I didn't even get to see as well. And so, you know, that's one thing with, you have a large conference in this virtual setting, is you're not, you know, necessarily going to be able to see everybody. And whereas in the in-person setting, it's a little bit easier to get around and see somebody and talk to them. So we're still trying to figure that out with these virtual programs, Phil. It's been an ongoing challenge.
I think another thing that we saw, and I sent both you and Ken some comments, is so much of what our agency partners talked about was backward looking rather than forward looking. And, you know, while there's lessons to be learned looking backwards, you know, we're attending those events to learn about what's coming. So I think is, you know, maybe some feedback that we could give our agency partners as well.
Great. Thanks, Phil. I appreciate all your feedback. Anybody else have any comments or thoughts on the conference? And if not, keep in mind that we are going to do this in person. It'll be in December. I think we already have the date, whatever the second Friday of December is, at the Anatole. And hopefully we will actually be able to meet in person.
That was my first time using that format. And I kind of was, I really liked the way it worked. You can move tables and floors and then, you know, chat with somebody at the different tables. So I thought that was a pretty cool format.
Yeah, and the other nice thing about it is you can scroll into the participant list and actually look for specific people if you want to try to find them, and then privately chat with them. Okay, well, great. Well, thank you all very much for your participation and sponsorship of that program. We'll look forward to being back in person later this year. The final thing that I wanted to mention to this group is, I think, as you all know, the 87th legislative session is starting today. And we had originally planned to do a day at the state on February 2nd, where we would have gone down as a chamber group and advocated on behalf of some of our priority issues during the session. But unfortunately, due to COVID, we're not able to do it in person, but we have pivoted. And I think Dev is partially responsible for coming up with this idea, but we are moving into a virtual legislative series where we'll be meeting every other Monday at 2 p.m. during the session for a total of 9 programs for an hour, where we'll be virtually checking in with legislators and other elected officials and journalists and lobbyists and others who are actively engaged in the session, just for a check-in on what's happening. And so the first of those programs is on January 25th at 2 p.m. And we're pleased that we have Texas Comptroller Glenn Hagar will be our speaker. And that'll be a timely session because he just released his revenue forecast yesterday. And so would encourage all of you to participate. The program will be free for all chamber members. And I'll put a link to the Glenn Hagar first program in the chat. So hope you all will participate in that series. And I see a question about the legislative sessions. Yeah, we will record those as well. Any questions about that? Okay, great. Well, with that, Bob, I'll kick it back over to you to close out our program.
Thanks, Jeff. And I did want to thank Kevin again. That'll be an exciting project. You know, it's a challenging project. You know, the capital cost will be pretty high, but you know, we've seen big projects get funded before through the leveraging of the private sector and others. So the thing to do is get these projects planned and keep moving the ball forward. So good luck, Kevin. And anybody, feel free to send me suggestions to line up speakers. I'm completely open. Our next meeting will be in 2 months. So that's all I had. So back to you, Jeff.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks for chairing our committee and organizing Kevin today. I think that was a terrific presentation. I've also just put in the chat the link for the first legislative series program with Comptroller Hager on the 25th. So if any of you are interested in attending that, go ahead and sign up, and we'll look forward to seeing you all there.